he was making a pitch. He was trying to make a break and make a start in California. So he asked me if I'd give him a horse.
I knew as soon as I got on him, I remember calling Frank. And I said, "Horse is going to take us to the World Cup in Dubai next year." He thought I was drunk.
I said, "Carol, don't give me this BS. I've heard it all before."
If he wins, we'll take him home for a pint. The local church. Oh, wait.
Nearly talked to you, wouldn't he?
This is a story about a horse. This is a story about a trainer. This is a story about magic happening.
Kinsale King in front, straight round the bend, doesn't matter, USA!
Hello and welcome to the Matt's Movie Reviews podcast. I am your host Matthew Pejkovic and this is episode number 202. Available now on video on demand is Chasing the Win, a documentary that delves into the ins and outs, ups and downs, and of owning and training a champion race horse. An engrossing, enthralling, and at times heartbreaking movie, Chasing the Win is a must-watch for horse racing fans and novices alike. Joining me now to talk about Chasing the Win is the film's co-director Laura Sheehy. Laura, I thank you very much for joining me today.
Thank you so much for having me, Matthew. I'm thrilled to be here. Thank you. And for watching my film.
Oh, not at all. And look, I did very much enjoy watching the film. I found it to be a really fascinating look into an industry that not many people know of, but don't really know about. And for you, this is very much a family affair. I mean, your father is a main subject in the film. And I was just curious, what was it about this story, about this horse, this trainer, and about your father that made you really want people to know about this story and make it into a documentary?
Yes, absolutely. Thank you. A great question, and I'm happy to explain because it is a funny thing that I did this. It started, I think after I did grow up going to the racetrack. My dad's owned horses for 40 years, and he has sort of in our family, not to make fun of it, but it's a bit of a joke because he doesn't buy the expensive ones, which are in the industry known to, of course, have potentially better potential. But I grew up around him racing, owning horses, and them not being very good, meaning they didn't win a lot of races. My memory as a child is not that we ever did a lot of fancy things with horses. We just would go to the tracks a lot. But in the reason I did decide to film this, when I came back from college and I was at the track with my dad and my uncle, who also appears in the movie, they just seemed like such characters. I think as I'd kind of grown and become my own person, I sort of saw them in this way that I thought, God, this is such a fascinating world, and someone should make a movie about this, is what I thought. Obviously, there are films about horse racing, but I just had that feeling. I said this to my dad at the time. I must have been in my early 20s, and he said, it's only a good story if there's a winning horse. He just sort of said, nothing's worth it unless there's a winning horse. And I clocked that, of course, at the time, not knowing I would be the one to make the film at all. But that stuck with me. And then many years later, myself, I'm a professional dancer and performer, but I was with a friend of mine from that side of the world, from the dance world, who was becoming an editor. And it was my friend Chris Gelfie, who's the co-director on the film, who had said, well, at the time, I was telling him, of this moment in horse racing that was happening to my father. He had met this young trainer who he had given a horse to, he'd given a break to by giving a racehorse to this young trainer who hadn't been tested yet. He was a rookie trainer. He had no horses of his own, but he'd wanted one. And he was from Ireland, and he, at the racetrack in California, had heard about my dad and pursued him to give him a break. And I think in a moment of weakness, my dad certainly gave a break to this kid and gave him a horse that a couple other trainers hadn't been able to be successful with. People thought the horse wasn't very good, which that just means retire the horse. I hate to speak to the sort of negative side of horse racing, but that just means when they say get rid of him, that means give him to a farm, let him do something else. This horse doesn't want to be a racehorse. And so my dad still loved this horse that he had purchased for, not very much money in the horse racing world. And he decided to give that horse to Carl O'Callaghan, who is the featured in our film too. And that gentleman showed sort of this amazing talent with this horse. He and that horse, I have to say, fell in love and have this really beautiful relationship, which really kind of brought this horse out. And he started winning races in California with him. He won a couple stakes races. And then from that, the trainer, this named Carl, had this idea to take the horse to Dubai and race him in the Dubai Golden Shaheen, which is one of the sprint race during the World Cup. And basically he won that race. So I'm not giving too much away. That's kind of in the trailer. But basically from there, this horse, went on a journey around the world to some extent. To basically, he had been invited to a lot of races, and they decided to go. So all of that, sorry, I kind of got off topic, but all of that is what made us tell this story. It was when the Queen of England invited this horse to race at the Royal Ascot that we decided to start filming. So we did film in reverse in terms of the first Dubai win. And my friend and I, Chris, decided he had a camera, and we had not made a film before, but we decided to follow this story because it felt so big. It felt so unusual and so big because for my dad, who'd never been winning and never had a good racehorse, won the Dubai World Cup with this gentleman he gave a break to who had also never won a race before, like a grade 1 race, I should say. It just became such a big thing happening that we just thought, this is unbelievable. And so that was the impetus to start this journey. And I will say, of course, we went in there sort of bright-eyed with no experience. And, of course, along the way, learned a lot of difficult things that come with making a documentary, which is you're following, I think, the story you think you're telling. And then, of course, I've learned very much and feel this happens in a lot of documentaries. The story changes because what you think is going to happen, of course, does not happen. And I will say that happened to us, and I hope people watch the film because I think it's a really interesting journey. But just the start of that is what opened my friend and I up into this world of which I was around, but I didn't know the details that I, of course, know now. And that was really why I think the film gets you into this world, because we were experiencing the world that way and learning and asking all the questions I think a novice would ask. So really, we had the access to this incredible story, kind of a very heightened look at horse racing because of the horse's talent and taking us to all these places. So that's what kind of got us to this higher level. And we did think it was a really interesting question to ask, what do you do after you win this big race? Like, what happens to a major racehorse and the people around it, after such a victory, such an unprecedented victory happens? And so we knew we were asking that question despite the outcomes of the races, but we certainly thought we were on a certain path, as you can feel in the film. And then I think, of course, different things happen, and we had to go with it. And it took a long time to kind of basically just figure out what story we were going to tell, because I think also we discovered so many incredible stories as we started telling the story. There really are so many fascinating people, fascinating angles to the business, and, different areas which there were so many different stories we started to think we were telling, and we'd have to reel it in. And it did take a lot of years to hone in on this cut that you saw, because there were just so many things that happened. As I don't want to give away too much, but that, we were stumped at times, and we were, I think asking ourselves the questions of what is this through line of the story we're telling. And I can go into that more if you want, but I'll wait.
Well, a fascinating part of the story is that of Carl himself. I mean, he's an immigrant from Ireland. He came to America, and he went from sleeping under the Brooklyn Bridge because he was homeless and nowhere to go, to being a champion horse racer. I mean, Carl's story really is the embodiment of the American dream, isn't it?
Absolutely. And I have to, again, give him the credit he deserves. He's a fascinating man. He is incredibly charming as well, full of life and full of ambition. And, we learned of his background that is true after much later in our journey too. And of course that had us also fascinated. We knew that he was a rookie, that he hadn't done it before, but we didn't know those details when we started either. So that was a part of his life that when he was living, he worked, for 17 years before he moved to California. He had come over from Ireland at 14, worked for 17 years lived in a barn in one of these different trainers on the East Coast training facilities, and was a hot walker and a groom, really from the bottom up, just looking for a break. He didn't have family or friends here. And at one point in between jobs, he was down and out, and he was homeless, like he said, living under the Brooklyn Bridge. I think he had a dog with him, and it was just this part of his life that we were kind of our jaws dropped and our heads turned. We didn't know this, and learned and came to learn a little bit more about it. But then he did get back on his feet by getting another job at another stable. And that's how he kind of got back into the business, back to being employed and getting back on his feet, before he again moved to California, which is when my father met him and all that. So that was before that. But it's absolutely fascinating. He's really a marvel of a man.
Carl, of course, is from Ireland. Your family from Ireland as well. I'm coming from a novice kind of perspective when it comes to the racing industry, racing culture. How much does the country of Ireland, the culture of Ireland, have contributed to racing, and not only in America but other places as well? How embedded are both kind of cultures to one another?
Yeah, that's a really great question. I certainly don't feel that equipped to answer that question in a historical sense. I just know, my dad did grow up in Ireland, and he and his brothers, he's one of 8. So out of 3 of his brothers, they were approached when they were young by some neighbors and asked to help groom some of their horses and ride some of their horses at a farm. And that's really what opened them up to they had lost their father. It's a very sad story. So they, I think without guidance as a house full of 8 kids, just kind of to help their mom, got out of the house, and they went to these neighbors who exposed them to horses. And these neighbors, I think, also were a bit of father figures to them because they didn't have a father. They were very poor in Ireland, and there was 3 young, ages 6, 7, and 8 of brothers going to work on this farm, and I think they thought they could be jockeys, and they convinced them they could be jockeys. They learned, and basically they were free labor for this farm next door, but it got them all hooked on horses. And those 3 brothers continued to be interested in horses. My uncle Dennis, who is in the film, did become a buyer for the Irish National Stud, I believe, which is a large organization. I really can't speak to the details of that because I just don't know. But he has, for a number of years in his life, besides being a banker, he also on the side he analyzes horses and the pedigree and a lot of what's talked about in the movie, and does help different people in Ireland want to, he acts not like an agent, but, a scout in terms of finding good horses in Ireland for people to buy. So he did that. He also does that with my dad, where he's always analyzing deep into the pedigrees and came up with this system that they use to analyze horses, because he believes that from, I think, every crop every year, there's the top 2% of stallions are the ones who produce the grade 1 winners, which is what their theory is. It's not tested. It's just a lot of people, of course, in horse racing, pedigree is huge. So that's not unique to them. But I believe the way he does it, or however they started doing it on their own, is their own little sort of system of looking at these mares and deducing who potentially might have good pedigree in order to try to find the foals of those horses. That's not unusual now. I believe even Winx, your very famous Australian racehorse, is, I think, the daughter of a famous horse, and that horse being famous because it won a lot of races. So within horse racing, it's all connected, and it all makes a lot of sense. Like here in America now, they're very focused on the pedigree from American Pharoah or Justify, the horses that won the last Derby and Triple Crowns. So that's I believe how horse racing works for a lot of people. But in Ireland, I know it's very big. I just don't know necessarily how big. But I know them growing up around it is certainly what spurred my dad's lifelong passion / obsession with it.
Your film is one that's filled with characters. I think one of the most prominent characters is the horse himself, King Zhao King. It's such an interesting... it's a $20,000 horse going up against $1 million competition. He has bad feet and he drinks Guinness. I mean, that's a character I've never heard one before. I'm just curious, before that Dubai World Cup win that really shocked everyone, what really were the expectations for him? I mean, was he on, so to speak, his last legs in regards to being a competition horse?
That's a good question. There was... I believe he had been with 2 other trainers, who of course we won't name because no one's trying to get anyone to feel bad about this. But he was with 2 other trainers where he did race some races and didn't show much potential. He came in probably 5th or 6th and didn't seem to have a passion for racing. So sometimes with horses, what I've come to learn is they will find other homes for them. Again, from therapy horses to living a life on a farm, or work horses in other people's farms. So often that would be the next path. If a horse doesn't show that he wants to race, he doesn't seem to want to run, I believe that's often what's done, is they'll find another home for them. Again, there's riding stables, there's lots of other places they can go in the U.S. So that's usually what, in my experience, I've witnessed happen to horses that don't show a fire for racing or an interest in racing. So that potentially would have been the case with King Zhao King. I know that he was with one trainer, not showing a lot of promise. My dad gave him to another trainer to see if anything had happened. The same thing. I think he felt he was getting overweight in that trainer's barn. I think he's mentioned now over the years, it was he was looking too heavy and this and that. They were not racing him very much. And I think the next step would have been something like that. But my dad really felt he had the potential. I think he just, from his own experience in horse racing and interest, he felt like, I don't want to, turn him out yet. I think he has something in him. So that's what kept my dad looking for another trainer, and I think it coincided with Carl's asking for a horse. And I think at that point, when he'd seen him race a few times and not show a lot of promise, he thought, well, I have nothing to lose. Let me give him to this gentleman. And he did. And in that, which I think is clear in the film, the unusual thing is there really is a connection between King Zhao King and Carl. Unlike, I think there's a lot of trainers and horses and people that have these connections, but there was something really special. Like I know my dad used to speak to, I've never seen a horse respond when someone comes around that way. Like they get excited when people are around them, but the way he would respond when specifically Carl would be around him was what was unique to this particular horse. And that story is he really would get excited. He'd, wag his head up and down and just get very excited when Carl was around. And so there was just a mutual bond there. And Carl speaks a little bit to it in the film, in that Carl would put other riders on him in the mornings, exercise riders and things, not during a race, but during other moments in the horse's day, and he wouldn't respond the same. If Carl was on him, it was just a whole different game. He was excited, he was happy, he seemed interested. But if other people were on him for an exercise or a breeze, he just didn't seem to have the same life. So that's something kind of unusual, at least even since the movie, that I've noticed with horses. And so that was something just really special. So I believe he might have retired early, but due to them finding Carl and this relationship, he blossomed into really what became quite an astonishing horse, and that's something to be said for that. I think, obviously, I guess back to like what validates my making of the film is that I feel like it is a really special story. We were lucky to have filmed now, I feel, because just to tell you the truth, Matthew, it was 10 years, that happened in 2010. We followed it for a year. We kept it pretty evergreen in the sense of not really mentioning dates because it's really a current story, because this is how racing is nowadays. A lot of horses travel around the world, literally fly different countries to attend these races because they are, in a lot of practical senses, for a lot of money, and they can keep people having the business and being able to stay in horse racing for a long time. So it's why it's happening nowadays. We felt by keeping the film very evergreen, we wanted to speak to what modern day horse racing is, at least now. I'm sure in 40 years it would be a different story, but now it's very much like it is in the film. So we feel it's very current. But since then, I guess I'll tell you is, you have to understand, my dad is still very active at this, and I look at all these horses he's been trying to race with, and we just haven't come across anything close to Kinsale King.
Yep.
And that makes us appreciate having made that story and really how special King and Carl are. I think to the business right now is having a moment, but also the stories in horse racing, just in general.
The thing about this industry is that it is solely based around, well, not solely, but money is such an important factor. If you don't win, you don't get the notoriety, you don't get, recoup your investments. I think your father is very much a competitive man. He has very much a philosophy of there's only one winner and a million ways to be a loser. He also said something else which was really interesting, is that, and it goes to really the crux on his part of the story, is that this is really a risky endeavor. He's playing a rich man's game with nickels and dimes, I think is what I remember him saying in that movie.
Yes, that's a great quote. Yeah.
So when Kinsale King wins at Dubai, how much of that is a shot in the arm for you and your family that's been in it for a long time, and you got a winner, but not only a winner, but a winner who wins on such a grand stage? I mean, is this something that is almost kind of blinding in regards to how a win can really kind of change the fortunes not only of a family but of a business that's working in this industry with such fierce competition?
Oh, absolutely. I think 100% the answer would be yes to that, in that it was not only a shot in the arm. I can't even speak to the finances yet, because not yet. I will. I just mean it was just the sheer fact that he won. I embarrassingly was not there. And this speaks to, again, why I think I grew up around this. I didn't comprehend what going to Dubai meant as I do now. At the time, I was very wrapped up in my own life, and I remember, of course, I'm close to my family, but I remember hearing this, and we all thought, yeah, okay, whatever. Meaning, he's been doing this for 40 years. We've been around it. He never has good horses. We did not think this horse would win. We did not understand the level of the race, meaning my brother, myself, friends, we just didn't take it in. So honestly, I remember getting a call the morning this happened. My mom sounded like she was crying hysterically. It sounded like something very wrong had happened. And I heard her be say, he won, and just sobbing and couldn't believe it. So it was just literally, it brings me to tears, because it's something that I just think never happened. And I suppose I just think about that because it's incomprehensible. I think it just was. I don't think we understood it. I think now, of course, and now I'm laughing, we do all understand it and can look back, of course, on this epic moment through the film and obviously what we experienced the next year. But it was really just disbelief. I think that's all I could say. It just really was. And, of course, my family's seen the film, and I worked on it for so long. I just lived with it so much that I feel like it's a normal fact now. But honestly, it was probably one of the most shocking things I could have ever heard come out of my mom's mouth, because it just was something. Again, he's really been around this. It's never been like this. His dream really is to win the Derby, because that is the biggest and most famous race. So that, I think I grew up thinking that. So not to belittle, but Dubai has become this insane event. It's incredibly worthwhile and famous and what is the right word? It's respected in the business. So I know it's a big event, but at the time it wasn't so familiar. So again, that was 2010. And so I didn't have the awareness of what that event was. And even in these last 10 years, it's grown to become this incredibly world-renowned event. And that's a difference than I think at 2010 what it was. I think it was only a couple years it had been around at the time. So, I mean, not to take anything away, it did, of course, it just did change our lives in the sense of really this moment for my dad. What I found was incredibly inspiring was he was 72 years old. He had never given up on horse racing, and his dream came true. Like, he won this amazing, huge race. And that with one of his horses that he had, not given up on. That's to my dad's side of, again, not retiring the horse or not, giving him to a farm or to some other place, but believing in that horse. And that was, to me, like at the time, the artist in me, it just spoke volumes, because I found that to be this incredible thing about basically not giving up on your dreams, whatever they are. And that was another part that we really wanted to sort of, make sure was in the film, was you just can't give up. And you never know what could happen. And of course, the journey isn't always what you think, but the most important thing is not to give up. And that's, I think, something I feel very strongly about.
Laura, Laura, you weren't at Dubai, but you were at Royal Ascot. Is that correct?
I was. And I did go back. So I did go when we returned, just to be clear. Yes. I wasn't the first time, though. Right.
Royal Ascot seems really interesting to me because it's a ceremony of there's a lot of kind of pomp and ceremony to it. It seems very formal, but it's kind of undercut by once those horses start racing, it becomes really primal because there are stakes on the line. Like I mean, who you are and what you're wearing and what your station is, life goes out the window. It's just all about that 1 minute. So in whatever seconds that is in front of you at the moment. What was that like to witness? What was that energy like in that arena? Was it really kind of tense before that bell rings and the horses start trotting?
Yeah, I'll say I felt like it was a bit surreal with the pomp and circumstance, like you mentioned. I think we captured a tiny bit of Carl in the interview saying, I felt like Laurel and Hardy, like we are so dressed up and they have these requirements. I mean, my partner in the film, we had to go suit him for a tux, in London before we went. You have to wear a tuxedo and a top hat as a male. And as a woman, you have to wear, I think it's a dress. It may have changed nowadays to a pantsuit or something, but you have to wear heels and a dress and a hat. These are requirements. You're not allowed in without that. So that was incredibly unusual and certainly added to the surreal feeling, I think, that was started once we were there, because we were there, we spent a lot of time at the barn and stable the horse was at with the team of people. They flew in a blacksmith because of his sore feet. Things that really incredible expenses they wouldn't normally have done, but they felt they had to take every precaution with this horse. They wanted to take care of him as best they could. So things like flying in the blacksmith and seeing him, the day before and checking on the horse, that part was unusual too, because the surroundings are unusual. There's so many things to being there that were foreign, of course, wonderful and charming, but foreign too. So then once we got to the event, of course, there was just so much. I remember getting the right passes for the right enclosures and all of these details, and of course being very careful about where you were filming. There's certain things you couldn't film. Of course, everyone nowadays with the phone, I think, films everything, but there were certainly rules. So to some extent, people were guerrilla filming things here and there, and then the footage we did get from the BBC, so I have the race, but sort of the backside stuff was also very, just unusual. I think the whole family felt a little funny. My filmmaker, Chris, my partner on this, we joked about how we felt like so fish out of water, like dressed up, but really not at the right party.
Yep.
So I feel like that was a part of, certainly I think it comes across, because I do think we look a little bizarre in that part of the story, but it was certainly what you had to do. So I think we were there sort of in awe. And of course, when the horses took off in that moment, I think you just your heart is suspended in midair and you're not breathing for those 70 seconds because it feels, so intense. There was at least at that point some pressure, not because of us making the film. I feel like that was not the pressure, but Carl, had just had this world stage that he won the Dubai World Cup. And this was 2.5 months after that, I think. It was March, April, May, June. It was in June. So about 2.5 months after that, here they were debuting Kinsale King against the world now with this next bit of competition. And the unknown, I didn't know, was Star Spangled Banner, this world-class horse from Australia, your country, who really was a very top-level horse. I won't give away for viewers what's happened, but we went against basically a top horse from Australia, which I don't know that they may have known going into the race that was happening, but, before when they made the decision to go, you never know who you're going to race against. And so, you got competition everywhere and great horses from everywhere. So that was just intense. Intense and a big moment.
Laura, you've been around horse racing, at least by proxy through your father, through your whole life. Now that you've covered it much more intensely, you've gone behind the scenes, you looked at the ups and downs and the ins and outs. Is there something that really surprises you? Is there one thing or a couple of things that really surprises you about the industry, about the process of getting Kinsale King to the place where he got and the ramifications afterwards?
Yeah, I will say it's I don't know if you're aware, but in California right now, there's a big conversation going on in horse racing in the U.S. because there was unfortunately some incidents at Santa Anita that brought some bad news to the sport. And one thing I guess I feel myself defending passionately is the sport itself and the people who are around it. They love these animals more than anyone I've ever seen. Like, they all dedicate their lives to these animals every day, every sort of hour of the day, making sure they're fine. There's someone somewhere checking on all of the horses, from what I can see. Again, anywhere in the world that is horse racing, there are people taking care of these things and who love these animals. So I guess the thing that I found the most shocking with somehow, when the sport gets criticized for what it gets criticized for, is the people who are a part of it love horses more than they love themselves, and are passionate about the animal and protecting the animal and the best care for the animal. So that's one thing I really discovered and feel that's what gets horses anywhere. Like, the ability, when you see anyone with, again, to speak to Winx, your incredible horse, I find her remarkable in your country, and you see those owners and people who care for Winx, and they couldn't be, they're all like a human child to them. Like, everyone is just beaming and with pride and wants to take every care they can to make sure every need, everything about that horse is fine, and make sure they're happy, which is that their disposition seems fine, their bodies are sound, and there's no injuries or anything. So I really feel like that's the sort of talked about part, is these people love these animals, again, more than anything, and they do anything for them. And I find that to be really, I guess, noble and beautiful. And I get upset when I hear it criticized, because I know what the intention is. And then, there's the pure excellence of these athletes. These horses are athletes, and they're not only majestic creatures, but they're really remarkable in what they go through. And I feel it can be challenging and difficult to make the right decisions with them. And that's where I think human error happens, and people accidentally race a horse who might be injured, and an injury can happen. And that's certainly where people criticize heavily the sport. But I do know the intentions are always pure. I have come across so many individuals from the lowest on the totem pole in horse racing to the highest. Like, the most famous trainer who's in our film, Bob Baffert, is a very famous figure in horse racing. He loves horses and the sport more than anything. And I guess I feel throughout the decisions you have to make, it can get challenging and difficult. And that's, of course, what either media or people latch onto when there's a problem. But when there's victory and joy, it's really celebrated, I think, from the top down. But it's only made possible by every single person in the sport. There's not one person who's not critical to this horse's success. And that's something I hope the film shows, and that I hope people realize. So that, just to give credit to where it's due, is these grooms who take care of these horses, and do maybe the more unpleasant jobs, love these animals and have such pride about them when they do well. And even when they don't, they do too. But, there is pride, there's excitement when the horses win. Like, why I wanted to make sure the grooms was there in our film was there was really a huge moment for them when these horses do well. They feel incredible pride and joy. And the Sheikh Mohammed in Dubai has a built into the racing, the purse winnings, that you have to give 10% to your barn of the winnings of that purse, which is something everyone should do. I know my parents felt incredibly happy to do that, and my dad does that with every horse, but it's not required. And in, like, let's say a horse wins the Kentucky Derby, it's not required you share that money with anyone. But in Dubai, you are required to share that money with your barn, which we think is an incredibly valuable thing, and so it should be practiced everywhere.
This story makes an incredible documentary. Is there any thought whatsoever of maybe adapting it into like a feature format film, dramatization? Because I think Carl's story, especially like as an immigrant tale, is in of itself can be really make for a good kind of like drama. Any thoughts about doing that?
Oh yeah, Matthew, I would love to do that, but I'm a little inexperienced in that. There's actually a wonderful documentary called The Dark Horse from out of Wales that I just read. Was a documentary. It came out the year before ours, and then it actually just got a big movie deal with some big movie stars to make. And I would love something like that, not just because of the big movie part of it, but I do think the movie itself lends itself very dramatically to a film, interpretation like that, a narrative feature adaptation. And I hope to. I would love to. I have to find the right producers to help me figure out how to do that exactly. But I know Carl would also love it. But, that's a pipe dream a little bit, but I would love for that to happen.
Well, if it does, I hope they cast Jim Broadbent to play your dad, because I think it would be a perfect fit.
That's a wonderful casting choice. I love that. I love Jim Broadbent, and I think my dad would be so thrilled. So thank you for that hint. I'll remember that. Thank you.
So before any of that happens, everyone out there, please check out Chasing the Wind, available now on video on demand. Amazon, I imagine, Laura, would be the best place for people to check this film out.
Yes, I believe in Australia it's available on Amazon Australia. It's also available on iTunes, Xbox, Google Play, Vudu, and YouTube Movie Rentals. You can also find it there.
So everyone do check it out, whether you're a horse racing fan or a novice to the whole thing. I found it to be a thrilling and enthralling movie. Great stories there and a great documentary. And Laura Sheehy, thank you very much for joining me today and congratulations with your movie.
Thank you so much for having me, Matthew. It's a pleasure. Thank you so much for your interest and for watching the film. I really appreciate it.